The courtroom air was stale, the kind of heavy atmosphere that usually precedes a long day of traffic tickets. But the second Victoria Sterling shoved those oak doors open, the mood shifted. I took a slow sip of Christina's coffee. It was lukewarm, exactly the way the budget cuts seem to leave everything in this building lately. Victoria didn't just walk in, she sauntered. Her heels clicked a sharp rhythm against the floor tiles, sounding like a countdown no one asked for. She walked right past the "Quiet Please" sign with her phone pressed to her ear, completely ignoring the fact that she was 20 minutes late. Between you and me, most people try to sneak in when they're late. She wanted an audience. The gallery felt it immediately. A young mother in the front row pulled her child a little closer, sensing the change in temperature. Two construction workers in the back row stopped their whispering and just watched her, their eyes narrowing at the sheer audacity of it. She reached the defense table and didn't even sit. She dropped a massive designer bag onto the wood with a heavy thud, finally lowering her phone but not ending the call. My bailiff, usually a statue of calm, shifted his weight from his left foot to his right. His hand hovered near his belt loop, a subtle sign, but I knew what it meant. He detected a threat to the order of this room. I cleared my throat, a sound meant to be a gavel strike without the wood. She looked up, peering over the rim of sunglasses she hadn't removed, and offered a look that suggested I was the one interrupting her day. She didn't apologize. "You can start whenever you're done staring." The room went dead silent. She tapped her wrist, looking bored. "I have a lunch reservation at 1, so let's speed read the boring parts." I didn't speak. I just watched. She looked around the room with total disgust, holding her phone up. "Is there a VIP Wi-Fi password? The signal in this dungeon is tragic." As the charges were read against Victoria Sterling, I looked for any sign of worry on her face. Reckless driving, evading a peace officer, disorderly conduct. To the average citizen, these are life-altering accusations, but to her, they sounded like menu items she intended to send back to the kitchen. She just tapped a manicured nail against the polished wood of the table. Click, 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 a metronome of impatience that grated against the silence of the room. I couldn't help but think of my father in that moment. He spent 40 years working in a mill, hands permanently stained with grease, teaching me that respect is a currency you earn, not an inheritance you spend. Victoria was bankrupt in that currency. When the prosecutor began his opening statement, she let out a loud, theatrical sigh and made a show of checking her watch. The veteran in the second row clenched his jaw. He sat with a rigid posture born of discipline, and he knew exactly what that kind of disrespect meant. Then she interrupted the prosecutor mid-sentence. She didn't object. She laughed. She turned fully around to the gallery, treating my courtroom like a bad comedy show. "Can you believe this drama?" she asked. No one smiled. The two workers in the back exchanged a look, that universal look of men who have been talked down to by people like her their entire lives. Between you and me, that's usually when a defendant realizes they've lost the room. She didn't care. This whole setup is adorable, really. Very community theater. My bailiff took a single step forward, his eyes locked on her. "I don't pay taxes, so I can be lectured by public servants." She looked right at me, completely unbothered by the weight of the law. "Just tell me the fine amount so I can Venmo it and leave." I leaned forward, ready to speak, but she beat me to it. "Do you have any idea who my father is?" Silence is usually a judge's loudest weapon, but today it was bouncing off Victoria Sterling like rain on a windshield. I adjusted my glasses, a small ritual I used to reset the optical center of my patience, and looked down at the defense table. She had refused to stand when I addressed her. When the court clerk asked her to state her name for the record, Victoria rolled her eyes so hard it actually caused the young woman to fumble with her stenography machine. The clerk's fingers shook slightly, rattled by the sheer weight of that blatant arrogance. Victoria didn't apologize. She just looked at the clerk's uniform and sneered. "I don't follow instructions from people who wear polyester." My bailiff moved then. He didn't rush, but he was no longer leaning against the wall. He took 2 deliberate steps toward the center aisle, his eyes locked on her hands. Between you and me, when a bailiff shifts his stance like that, he's not stretching his legs. He's getting ready. But Victoria didn't notice, or she didn't care. She started scrolling through her phone again, the blue light illuminating a smirk that said she believed the rules were flexible for people with the right last name. I warned her that she was bordering on contempt of court. Her response was a dismissive wave, as if she were swatting away a bothersome fly. Contempt is a feeling, Your Honor, not a crime. She looked around the room for approval that wasn't there. The air in the room tightened immediately. In the front row, the young mother covered her child's ears. It wasn't because of profanity. She was trying to shield him from the ugliness of that kind of entitlement. The veteran behind her sat rigid, staring straight ahead, his knuckles white on his cane. The two workers in the back whispered something sharp to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. I told her again to put the phone away. She let out a laugh that had no humor in it. My lawyer costs more per hour than you make in a month. I leaned back, keeping my face neutral, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. If you arrest me, my dad will have this building turned into a parking lot. She tapped her screen, looking annoyed, not at the charges, but at the inconvenience of it all. Are we done? My battery is dying. When the prosecutor requested permission to play Exhibit A, Victoria Sterling barely looked up from her fingernails. She didn't realize that File Cam 402 Night was about to strip away every layer of protection she thought she had. I granted the request, and the large monitor descended from the ceiling. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers, a habit I've kept for 20 years when I know the truth is about to come out. The room went dark, save for the cold blue glow of the screen. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. The audio crackled to life with the distinct, undeniable sound of a roadside stop. On screen, Victoria was stumbling out of a luxury sedan, bracing herself against the doorframe. The dialogue in the video was sharper than any testimony a witness could provide. Officer, ma'am, please step back. Defendant, make me, peasant. The courtroom watched, completely mesmerized. At the defense table, Victoria froze. Her foot, which had been tapping rhythmically against the table leg for 20 minutes, suddenly went still. She swallowed hard, a visible lump moving down her throat. Take these handcuffs off or I'll have your badge for breakfast. Between you and me, there is a specific kind of silence that falls when a room realizes just how ugly entitlement sounds when it's recorded. The video shifted to the officer's perspective. On screen, she spat at his boots. The gallery gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the space. The veteran in the second row closed his eyes, shaking his head slowly in deep shame. The two workers leaned forward, elbows resting on their knees, witnessing the undeniable truth stripped of her current posturing. A mother in the front row turned her child's head away from the monitor. My bailiff didn't move a muscle, but his gaze shifted from the screen back to the woman sitting at the table, his face unreadable. The confidence was cracking. The untouchable facade had a hairline fracture, and the video kept playing. I own this highway. I own you. I allowed the silence in the room to speak louder than any gavel ever could. Your pension is gone. Poof. When the overhead lights buzzed back on, Victoria Sterling looked like a different person. The arrogance that had coated her like armor when she walked in was gone, stripped away by 30 seconds of grainy dashboard footage. The dynamic in the room had completely inverted. The gallery wasn't just annoyed anymore, they were hostile. You could feel the walls closing in, and for the first time since she strutted through those doors, Victoria seemed to realize that her father's name was a shield made of paper. She looked at the blank monitor, then at the prosecutor, and finally at me. Between you and me, I've seen this look 1,000 times. It's the moment the reality of the law collides with the fantasy of entitlement. Most people fold, they cry, they apologize. Victoria didn't retreat, she lashed out. It was the desperate, frantic tactic of a cornered animal. She stood abruptly, shoving her heavy chair backward. It made a horrible, high-pitched screech against the floor tiles that caused the court clerk to physically jump in her seat. Victoria pointed a shaking finger at the prosecutor. Her face was flushed, the cool veneer completely melted away to reveal a temper tantrum. This video is doctored, it's a setup. I remained seated, my hands folded calmly on the bench. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for the gavel. I didn't need to. She swung her finger toward me, her voice climbing an octave, cracking under the strain of her own fury. She was shouting now, trying to compensate for her lack of power with sheer volume. I will bury your career under a mountain of lawsuits. The reaction in the room was instant. In the front row, the young mother pulled her child sharply into her lap, turning his face into her shoulder to shield him from the impending explosion. The veteran braced himself against the bench in front of him, as if preparing for a physical altercation. The two workers muttered something low and angry, leaning back to distance themselves from her. My bailiff was there in a heartbeat. He stepped fully into the well of the court, his body angled to intercept her if she took one step toward the bench. He didn't draw a weapon, but he dropped his hand to his waist, his posture shifting from observer to enforcer. Victoria didn't care. She was too far gone. You are nobody. You are nothing. She slammed her hand onto the defense table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. The bailiff took another step, entering her personal space. She turned on him, eyes wide and wild. Don't you dare touch me. Sit down. I didn't shout the command at Victoria Sterling. I didn't have to. I spoke those two words with the absolute crushing weight of authority that this bench represents. My bailiff took one distinct step closer, his hand raised with the palm out. He didn't reach for her, and he didn't speak. He simply let the threat of physical removal hang heavy in the air between them. Victoria looked at the bailiff, her chest heaving. Then she looked at me. Finally, she turned her head and looked at the gallery. She was scanning the faces for support, for someone who recognized her status, but she saw no allies. She saw no fans. She saw only witnesses to her collapse. That was the moment the fight left her. She sank back into her chair. It wasn't graceful. It was a total collapse of posture. Her shoulders slumped forward, making her look smaller, younger, and infinitely less powerful than she had 2 minutes ago. I didn't mean it like that. The court clerk let out a long, shaky breath she seemed to have been holding since the video played. You could hear it in the silence. The room exhaled with her. The storm had finally broken. Between you and me, this is the part of the job that never makes the news. It isn't the shouting that matters, it's the quiet that comes after, when the reality of the situation finally lands. I watched her for a moment, letting the silence do the work. I thought of my mentor, Judge Reynolds. He used to say, the higher the pedestal, the harder the fall, and it is our job to catch them with the law. The community needed this moment just as much as she did. In the back row, the two workers finally uncrossed their arms. Their body language shifted from defensive to relaxed. They looked at the defendant, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of pity. The veteran in the second row gave me a single, sharp nod. It was a respectful gesture, an acknowledgement that the perimeter was secure and the rules still mattered. The mother in the front row loosened her grip on her child, smoothing his hair down. Order hadn't just been restored, it had been vindicated. Victoria was silent now. She was staring down at her hands, picking at a loose thread on her jacket. Her phone sat on the table, the screen dark, completely forgotten. She looked up at me, her eyes wet. Can we just start over? The silence that settled over Victoria Sterling was different now. It wasn't the tense, angry silence of before. It was respectful, waiting for the final word. I picked up the case file, making a point to look past her father's name on the header. I looked only at the statutes. I took a breath, letting the moment land. Privilege is a ladder, I said, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room, but the law is the ground, and eventually everyone has to come down. I delivered the sentence without hesitation. Maximum fine authorized by the state. License revocation for 3 full years. Then came the kicker, 400 hours of community service. I made sure to specify exactly where those hours would be served. Roadside cleanup on the very stretch of highway she had claimed to own. Victoria didn't argue. She didn't roll her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, as if the air had been let out of the room. You will wear an orange vest, not Chanel. The veteran in the second row smiled, a genuine, satisfied smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The two workers nodded to each other, clearly appreciating the irony of the manual labor she was about to perform. The mother in the front row finally exhaled, resting her hand gently on her child's shoulder. My bailiff stepped back to his post, his job done. Between you and me, they say justice is blind, but today it felt like it had 20/20 vision. Dismissed.